This is the Hard Thing Podcast. Today, we are overcoming average. Welcome back to the Hard Thing Podcast. This is your host, Justin Lewis, and this is the podcast that helps you win the war on average in your daily life. Our goal is to help you get the tips, tricks, tools, tactics, whatever you need to do hard things so that way you can overcome average and step up above mediocrity. We want you to have a better life, and to do that, we're going to give you all that we have, all the resources available so you can do that. And what we do on Mondays with that is we actually interview high-performing individuals who have been there, done that, done hard things, and we extract these insights and action items from their stories and give them to you so you can emulate them in their journey. We want you to do hard things. And so let me tell you about today's guest. Today I talk with podcast host Dan Cumberland, who started the Meaning Movement podcast, which is all about finding meaning in your work and being able to find meaning in everything you do in life, really just having a better life because it means more. So without further ado, let me show you my conversation with Dan Cumberland. Well, thank you for being on my show, Dan. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you.
I'm so happy to be here, Justin. Thank you so much. I love what you're doing with this show. Love just how straight to the point and actionable everything that you're doing is. It's super fun.
Well, great. I'm happy you like it. So without further ado, let's get to the question I ask every single one of my guests. Dan, what is the hardest thing you've ever done?
There's so many answers, which I guess is I guess it's hard for me to answer the one hardest because I think there's so many different facets of life. The first thing that jumped to mind is just parenting in general. I have three kids, a 5-year-old, 2-year-old, and a 3-month-old. So that's one piece of life that's like, it's like the marathon kind of hard thing on the personal side. But the one that I think is the, I guess, overall arching theme of challenge in my life is I went to school to be a youth pastor. Well, I went to be a pastor, ended up being a youth pastor, thought that that's what I was supposed to be, was supposed to do with my life, and it wasn't a good fit for me. And I didn't know what to do next. And that was, I left that job 10 years ago now, which is crazy that it's been that long. And that process of going from, this is what I'm going to do. I thought that my path was this one clear thing. I thought that what my future looked like one specific future. And then to have that kind of fall apart and then have to rebuild out of what felt like out of nothing. That's the hardest thing I think that I've ever done. And I feel like I'm continually doing it. I'm still doing it, still finding my way. But that's the short answer.
Excellent. Well, if there's one thing you're going to learn about the Hard Thing Podcast is if you bring it up, I'm probably going to dig into it. So we're going to talk mostly about your second answer, but I want to spend some time on your first answer, parenting, because likely a lot of people listening to this show will want to be parents or are starting to be parents or are parents right now. So I'd like to know some of your, like, the biggest things you've learned from parenting and even some of the biggest things you've learned from parenting during a pandemic, if you could. Yeah,
totally. I think the thing about parenting is, if there's just one thing, I think that your relationship with your kids is a reflection of your relationship with yourself. And so if there are like the things that get under your skin, the things that where it's like, I just wish you wouldn't do that. I wish that they would, be this way or that way. I think often have more to do with you than they do with them. And so I think, like, the thing that I've learned about parenting is that that you always have to be looking back at yourself. And yes, I want to raise curious and courageous and bold and strong and compassionate. All these words of what I want my kids to be like. And when they're not being that, it's like why are they like that? But then I have to turn that mirror back around on myself and say, like, okay, why is it that I can't be more patient right now when it's, 11:30 and my daughter's, calling for me again in the middle of the night, and and I'm trying to sleep and she's ruining my sleep. This is the third time I've been in there, or whatever it might be. It's really easy to let those moments and my I guess my needs and get in the way of like, yeah, she actually needs something. There's something that's going on for her. This is how she's dealing with it, and how can I be there for her, instead of just focusing on how annoyed I am or how grumpy I am or whatever it might be. So I think that's the first thing, is that like you always have to be looking back at yourself, and the more that you're able to do that, the more that you're able to work with yourself, I believe, the better you'll be able to show up for your kids and see. Hopefully, my kids are still young, so I was testing this theory, but hopefully that then will allow me to see them and for who they are, instead of just seeing myself reflected back, or these parts of myself reflected back that I'm working with, which then I hope will allow me to help them be the best version of themselves that they can be, help grow them into great people.
Wow. That's very insightful. So basically, summing that up, seeing past yourself to seeing other people from their point of view, rather than seeing other people from your point of view, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I would say, like, not just reacting out of how their needs are impacting you, but trying to focus first on what's the bigger thing going on for them, and how can you like keep that in the forefront of your mind, instead of just my own stuff.
Yeah. What I find interesting about that response is you can transplant the word kid with really any other relationship you have. I mean, I can think of it on the reverse, as a child, think about my parents and how maybe I acted to them in a wrong way because of how I was feeling about myself. And I think that's very insightful. I think maybe with kids, it's just easier to see because they are so dependent on you as a parent that just naturally shows forth. So that's really fascinating.
Totally. Yeah.
Awesome. Now I want to move on and talk about, so you said you started out wanting to be a pastor. That's fascinating to me. What made you choose that particular line of work? And then detail for us how you felt it started falling apart.
Yeah, man. Great question. I think it's a long story. If you'd asked me then why I was a youth pastor, I would have said that God called me to be a youth pastor. I thought it was like this capital C calling. And actually, a great way to answer this is with a story of when it started to fall apart, because it's kind of how I that very question is kind of the beginning of the unraveling point for me. So I was in this job and just really struggling, and I felt like I was well, I would say like a square peg in a round hole, but at the time it felt like yeah, I guess but I guess it was like that the question wasn't like, why isn't this a good fit for me, or why is this so hard for me? It's what's wrong with me that I can't get this to work. So I was feeling, just getting a lot of criticism from parents about what I was doing with their kids, a lot of just difference in opinion from everyone around me, both on staff at the church I was at, and, again, the parents, about how we should do this or that. Felt like I was really lost in the midst of it. Felt like I was like being held to a standard that wasn't really, I couldn't do it. I couldn't be everything to all the people in my life that I felt like I needed to be. And was then, turn that back on myself, and was, really struggling, was feeling really depressed, really, just this cognitive dissonance between, this is what I was called to do, capital C, called, by God, is what I felt at that time. And therefore, I should be able to do this, but it's not working. So there's something wrong with me in this. And so I went with that question and was trying to trying to solve it, trying to figure it out, trying to figure out what was wrong. Went to this leadership retreat with a coach and a few other people, and one of the activities that they had us do is map out the last year of our lives, and the positives and negatives, kind of as an entry point into the weekend and the work that where we are at that moment going into that weekend, and what are the problems that we wanted to work on, things we wanted to solve that weekend. And the way that we did is just a small group. Each person would kind of present to the group, and other people would ask questions to follow up. Is at this was I was living in Chicago at the time. This was at this lake house it was not on Michigan. It was in Michigan, not on Lake Michigan, but like a huge log cabin up in the mountain. Not up in the mountains because no mountains there. I'm in Seattle, so I always think mountains. Out in the forest, this huge log cabin on a small lake out in the forest. And I just remember standing in front of this group right in front of this big fireplace inside this massive log cabin, presenting this material, saying, here's where I've been, here's what my last year has been like. And then I finished presenting, and it's just kind of like silence. People are just kind of maybe digesting what I've said, but it's kind of like an awkward, long silence. Like they didn't know what to say. And then the leadership coach who was kind of guiding the weekend, he asked the very first thing, he said, "Who told you needed to be a youth pastor?" And like, I mean, even just saying that right now, I still like have so many feelings about that. And at the time I got mad. I was like, I didn't really know what to say. I was like, well, oh God, or I don't know. And then I was like, but why are you asking that? And then he basically was just like, I just looking at this, what you've shared here, just question whether or not that's, what you should be doing, which isn't what I thought going into the weekend was going to be coming out of that weekend. And now looking back, I can see, like, I can connect a lot of dots in my life to say, okay, makes sense of why I ended up where I ended up. And the short answer to his question is my youth pastor in high school basically told me that. Not that like he said, Dan, you need to be a youth pastor, but like that's the value system that he lived in, that doing ministry and serving is the highest thing, the best thing that you can do with your life. And I wanted to do, I want my life to matter. Still do. That's why I do everything that I do. But at that time, like I was very impressionable. I was being involved in my youth group. That was the kind of the center of my life at the time. There are kids, all the kids that I hung out with, all my friends were all like, that was kind of the hub of our community. And so when I thought forward about, what I wanted to do, I was like, well, this is serving people, helping people. This is, what is important to me and where all my friendships come from. And with my youth pastor's voice in the back of my mind, that ministry is the best thing that you can do with your life. It didn't really feel like there were any other options. And I think at that point in my life, I didn't have anyone, in high school and even younger, didn't have people who were really listening to me, seeing me, and helping guide me and I guess reflect back to me who I was and what I was good at and help me think about where I might want to go and what I might want to do with my life. And so that's how I got into that role, and that's how it began to crumble. So then I took that question and just started digging, like, okay, so how if this wasn't God's capital C calling on my life, then what might that be? Like what not that I'm looking for a capital C calling, but like what would be another thing that I can do that would feel meaningful, that would feel significant? What was, if this was not the thing that I was put on this earth, that I was born to do, then what is that thing? And that led me down a long path of going to therapy, of eventually going to grad school to study that very question of how do we understand and navigate these questions of identity, of meaning, and purpose, because that's really what it is. It's about who I was, and I think that work is always saying something about who we are and what we want to bring into the world. It's very, very personal questions, which we can get into that some more. But took me down the path to what I'm doing now, which is, with the meaning movement, helping people with these same questions. And that's what, I guess, the answer that I found to that question of why am I here and what am I here to do? It's to help people answer those very questions. I know it's a little bit meta that I find meaning and purpose by helping other people find meaning and purpose. But it's because I've been to those painful places and know what it's like to be there. So that's the story.
Wow. So a couple points that I want to pull out of that story. I think going back to what we were talking about parenting, your story shows that principle in action, maybe the wrong way done. And especially talking about your youth pastor. Now, him being a youth pastor is noble. Him wanting to help you do something noble is noble. Him telling you that the only thing to do would be a youth pastor might be slightly misguided, especially because like what we were talking about, he's working on his reflection, not your reflection.
Exactly. Great point.
And the reason why I bring that up is because I see a lot of people today, and I know you talk a lot about helping people find out what to do when they're lost. Well, I see a lot of people today who are feeling lost precisely because they keep having people pass down these paradigms that worked at one time, but don't necessarily work today. My parents are both school teachers, and they made me promise to go get a college education. Now, if I wanted to go be a real estate investor or be a plumber or something, a college education might not necessarily be the thing that is the most strategic for me. So I just love that you brought up that point.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a great connection there. And I think, even to take it back to ourselves, I think both there's two different ways we can apply that. One is in our own lives, of like whose voices are the ones that are guiding our process, and who are the voices that have guided us into where we are now. So if we're feeling stuck or we don't know what's next, a good way that's looking forward, a good way to evaluate that and to think about that and get clarity on that is to then look back and say, okay, how did I get here? What are the turns that I've taken along my path? And then what are the signs, the signposts, the map that I was using to get to this place? And to think in terms of, people, parents, teachers, mentor figures, whatever it might be, institutions, schools, cultures, any of those I say voices, but those are the kinds of entities that influence the way we think about ourselves and we think about what we should or shouldn't do. And we could think in terms of do's and don'ts. And this is, I think, where we'll come back to at the end about a good exercise for people to do about this is to think in these terms and to do some analysis. But then the other direction that I think is really helpful to apply is like to think about as a parent, as a mentor, as a friend, like as people in your life as you're interacting and you get to be in these conversations about, who someone is, where they want to go, and all these things, which often they come up as just these little tiny little, you get little hints of them, little short conversations. It's not like every day you sit down with your kids or your friends and have these big question conversations, but they come up in these little ways. And think about how you can be listening to them and hearing them and not just offering them answers, but helping them dig deeper into their questions. Because if you're just offering answers, it's coming more from you than it is, from them. And sometimes we can be those voices that are leading people astray in some way.
Yeah. Just curious. Sometimes we do need to give answers, and sometimes we do need to listen. In your experience, especially having worked with so many people, where do you, or how do you find that line between knowing when to shut up and listen, and when to break through and be like, hold on, this is something you need to remember?
Yeah. I think that the main difference that I see in that is it's really helpful to have someone on the outside giving perspective as far as what they like, themes that come up or things that someone keeps saying, or questions they keep asking, or ways that they show up in the world. Like, it's really, everybody needs someone to say, hey, you're always curious about like doing really hard things, Justin? Like, why are you so curious about that? Like, what's that about for you? Why is it that what's driving, those kinds of things, like noticing and then reflecting that back to you. I think that's like a really important role that we need people in our lives doing that for us. I think where we cross that line is to say, yeah, so therefore you should go be a personal trainer because personal trainers make people do hard things. And I think that's where it comes from, being reflective to prescriptive. And I'm less interested in being prescriptive and with other people. I think that's where it can be, where we can go astray. And also with myself, I don't want people to, sometimes I do. I want people to just tell me what to do, solve my issue. But the better way to reflect back, in these big questions is to notice, to give feedback, but not tell the person what to do with it, how to go apply it, because that's something that they need to figure out.
Wow, I love that answer. In summary, reflect the other person rather than reflect yourself, as we've been talking this whole time. I wanted to go back a little bit and talk about, there were two things you said in your story about how it, you became a youth pastor as well as how it kind of fell apart. Yeah. First, you said that you kept on feeling, what's wrong with me? I can easily see a lot of other people feeling that same way. Maybe they're going to college or they're just not living up to their parents' expectations or whatever, In hindsight, what are some things that you might have prescribed to yourself or to someone else? I know you don't like to prescribe, but in this case, go ahead and give some tips on helping someone who has this mindset start changing away from it.
Totally. Yeah. I love that you bring it back to mindset, because I think mindset is absolutely so important. So if you're in that place where you feel like, things aren't working and what's wrong with you, I think there's a handful of different directions you should go and could go. I think the first is to note that it's not you that's the issue. Sure, you may be at a place, and if you're at a place where anyone listening who's significantly depressed and struggling with some form of mental illness, absolutely go and seek help, find a therapist. Like, that's super important. I've been in therapy myself, and when I've been in really dark places, and it is really, really helpful. And outside of professional mental health, find someone to talk to, and start asking someone that you can trust, someone who you can bring your questions to, who isn't going to just try to solve your problem for you, but help you just sit in your questions and reflect back to you what they are hearing. But know that, like, it's not necessarily you that's the problem. It's that you're in the wrong environment. And it's like, if you caught a butterfly, right? We're going to be butterflies, this analogy, and you put it in an aquarium, because that's where you want it to. You want to raise this butterfly and have it as a pet. And so you put it in an aquarium that's intended for for fish. The butterfly is going to die. And that might be the same situation that you're in. It's not that it's not that the butterfly is the issue. You're a beautiful butterfly. It's just that you're in a situation, you're in an environment that isn't the right fit for you. You're in a work situation, you're in whatever it might be. And so the question then is, so then what, if the issue isn't you and the issue is the environment, the situation, the space that you're in, how can you begin to think about, okay, what would be a better situation to be in, a better work situation, whatever life situation it's in, and how can you begin making steps towards making those changes? And if you don't know, because those are big hard questions, I think it's to start small and just say, okay, why is it that I feel like I need to stay here? What are the things that, why does it feel hard for me to leave whatever situation this is? Just to talk about, professionally, if it's the job or the career path that you're in, why is it that I feel like I have to be a teacher? Or why is it that I feel like I can't leave teaching? And then just to start working backwards from there, it's like, okay, it's because my parents were both teachers, and because they always said, I hope that you'll be a teacher like we are someday. Or whatever it might be. And as you begin to name those voices and those kind of guiding posts that you've used to make choices in the past, even just the act of acknowledging, okay, I've ended up here in part because my youth pastor, in my case, my parents, in your case, just by saying that by naming that they hold some power, that they guided gave you guidance in the process, that like takes back power and gives you agency again over your story. So even just acknowledging and naming that takes back that power, that then gives you, like, it starts to free up more space, so that you're not here because you're stuck here and you don't know what to do. It's like, oh, I'm here because these things happen. And that makes a lot of sense. And that's a totally different narrative, totally different mindset.
Definitely. It's really important to always recognize the factors that influence you on getting where you go. Always making sure to, take responsibility for what you've done, but
Yeah.
realize that you were working off maybe some misinformation, or they were doing the best they could. They're not experts, things like that. Because I mean, every parent probably wants their kids to understand that.
Totally.
They're not the experts.
Well, I think that's a really great point. Like, my parents were great. My youth pastor was great, and they were all doing the best that they could. And this is something where, like, I have to give grace to those figures in my story and my past, because I'm doing the same thing with my kids, right? I'm not going to be a perfect parent. I'm not going to always, reflect back to them and perfectly, but hopefully I can do better. But I think it's also important to note, like, sometimes we have a hard time with this activity of saying, okay, it's because my parents said this or that, because we don't want to reflect negatively, and even in our own psyche, even in in our minds, the version of our parents in our minds, we don't want to say that they're a bad parent. We can have a hard time with that, depending on the person, depending on the relationship with their parents. And so I'm not saying that you need to say, yeah, my parents were evil and had malintent for me or whatever. It's just like, yeah, they didn't necessarily give you what you needed in this one particular area. And hopefully your version of them that you hold in your mind and in your psychology has room for that.
Yeah. It's definitely important to give people grace, and even ourselves. One question I wanted to ask as well, and I'm pretty sure the listeners kind of understand this aspect that you're saying. Where's or at least how do you find the line between it's time to change environments versus I should stay in this environment and just work harder, improve my skill set, and kind of morph me to the environment? Where do you find that dichotomy? Because I'm assuming that it's not always the case that you do need to leave.
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. And it's a hard one to answer. I think that I'm very much a fan of doing hard things. That's why I love this podcast. I'm very, very much a fan of pushing yourself, setting big goals, and getting after them. I do that, every day. I know that's something that you've talked about in past episodes. Writing your goals. I write my goals. Well, not literally every day, because sometimes I skip my morning journaling, but most days I write my big goals in my journal at the beginning of the day. And I think that there's a lot of credence to pushing yourself and becoming more. It's also something you've talked about, like that it's about how much pain can you tolerate, and how much can you stay in it. I think the best analogy is like physical, it's fitness and exercise, and like doing hard physical things. And that's probably the best way to answer this, is that there's a difference between working out super hard because you want to grow, because you want to, lift more, grow muscle, or maybe, increase your endurance or whatever it might be. And so it hurts and it's hard, but it's good for you because you're pushing through, versus this hurts and it's hard and I'm actually pulling my muscle right now and injuring myself. And, I think for anyone who's done, a lot in terms of fitness can recognize that dichotomy, that the difference there, where there's this line that when you cross it, you've crossed it. When it comes to, staying in a job that's, really, really hard, I think that there is a difference between this is hard and this is challenging. I don't know if I can do it, but there's growth for me in this, versus I don't know if I can do this, and it feels like it's personally damaging to me and to who I am. And I think it comes back to who you are in that, and how it relates to your identity. If you're in a place where you're being where your sense of self is being compromised, especially in an abusive way. I think that's where it's like, yeah, this is not a healthy place for you to stay. Not that you can't learn from it, and not that there's always like, yeah, so then just because work is complicated, right? Because maybe you need that job to pay the bills, to feed your family, or whatever might be. But if there's a possibility, if there are options, I think it's good to explore other options in those situations.
Definitely. I actually have an example to kind of illustrate this point. Towards the end of high school, I received the opportunity to work. Have you ever heard of Cutco knives?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yep.
Everyone's heard of Cutco. I
love it.
I was recruited to be one of those knife salesman people. And they,
Awesome.
they had me try it for like a weekend, and they actually told us, use the directories of your religious congregations, call them up and just ask them. And the whole time I was doing that, I felt like such a sleazebag, because you're not supposed to, at least in our religious congregations, you're not supposed to use the directories for that purpose. And towards the end of those 3 days, because I was giving it a full shot, towards the end of those 3 days, I was trying to sabotage those presentations I was doing, but people still kept on buying just because they liked me. And at the end, I knew I can't do this anymore, because I don't like how I feel as a person because of this. So I think that's demonstrating what you're saying there.
That's perfect. I love it.
You mentioned also that you felt it was your calling, Big C. I come from a religious background where, we bandy that word about often, finding your calling. And so I want to ask, how do you help your clients, and how do you help people find the distinction between knowing, big calling and big C calling and little C calling, and knowing how to navigate those waters?
Yeah, that's a great question. A very, very complicated question. Because often I find that the people that struggle the most with these ideas and even in figuring out, what are they going to do, have some sort of religious background. And I think that there's a lot of baggage, for all the good, the good that comes from those experiences. There's also some this is where it can get a little bit dicey, because it's a religious institution it's another voice telling you who you are and how you should be in the world. I think that it's really important to just step back from the theological implications and just think just about people, about how people are in the world, and to note that calling isn't about that there's this mountaintop experience, that the skies are going to open up and that the light's going to come down. You're going to hear this voice say, you should be this, you should be a doctor, or, and we all really want that. We want that kind of crystal clear clarity. It would just make things so much simpler. But then even from a religious standpoint, my background is as a Christian, in the Bible, there are times when that happened. There are stories, but then there's also stories in both the Old Testament as well as in the Jewish scriptures about I think it was the prophet Elijah, who was looking for the voice of God, and he went to, and it's so much more beautifully written than I'll be able to retell at this moment. But he went out of this cave that he was in, and there was fire, and he thought maybe that was the voice of God, but it wasn't. And there was wind, and maybe that was the voice of God, and it wasn't. And all these big natural events were happening, but none of them was the voice of God. And then he heard God in this still, it's talked about as the still small voice. And I think that's I think it's just beautiful, but I think it's a really important way for us to think about ourselves and about capital C, God's calling, but even for non-religious people to think about calling in your life, that it has more to do with who you are and how you show up in the world. and it's more of a theme of impact and meaning than it is about this big dramatic, a singular event. And I think it's really important to also extract the word calling from work, and a job. A job or your work is an opportunity to realize some aspect of that, but it isn't necessarily that thing in and of itself. Meaning, you're not going to have a job that is your calling, but you might be able to activate or do some of that good, really meaningful work for you in your job. So again, I said you talked about a doctor, right? Maybe someone feels called to be a doctor because they are passionate about helping people that really need help, and they just love that transformation of seeing someone who's really sick and then getting them what they need, caring for them, and like that loving, caring, nurturing part of themselves. That's what they get to activate in that role as a physician, as a doctor. Take that same person though, and maybe they didn't have the kind of life that allowed them to be a doctor, to go to medical school, the education, all those other things. They could do something very similar in a teaching role, or some other kind of role where they're able to, as a daycare worker, where they're able to care for kids and nurture and be a part of that same kind of impact in a completely different realm. And so I think those are two kind of important places to extract the meaning of when we're talking about calling, from the singular, capital C calling, but then also from the work and the dream job, or this one singular career calling. That's bigger. It's a theme that runs throughout our lives, a theme of meaning. There are four areas that I've seen in people's work, from the research that I've done, where you can look and should look for these kind of themes in your life. And since I was a pastor, they all start with P, which are your the people that you work with, the process, what you do for work, and I'll explain these a little bit more. The people, the process, the product. So that's what the work is accomplishing, and then the profit, which is the money. Not that money is inherently meaningful, but I'll talk about these in order, and then I think it'll make more sense. So the people is one of the easiest to understand. It's the people that you're working for, that you're working with. I think a good way to think about this is, it's even if the work that you're doing isn't doing something really amazing in the world. So maybe you work at a tech company, you work for Facebook, and you don't love everything that Facebook does, but you're doing it with people that you really enjoy, and you're able to show up with the people on your team, your manager, your coworkers, or whatever might be, and show up with them in a really meaningful, important way. Again, going back to those themes of impact, like that you're able to care for, or nurture, or whatever it might be that's meaningful for you. So maybe you're not doing important work, but you're going about doing it in an important way with the people in your life, or maybe it's the people that you're doing it for. If you're in a service, some sort of service role. So that's the people. Second is the process. The process is actually doing the work itself, and it's easiest to think about this in terms of an artist or a writer, like a writer who just loves to write, just loves to get into their morning pages and just hit their writing goal for the day, or whatever it might be. Or maybe it's a podcaster who just loves to have these kinds of conversations, right? And it's just so fun to be in it, just doing the substance of that work. That's the process. But then other people, it might not be as much fun to do the process of their job. They just, that's part of what they have to do. The product, and it's for people who are in business, that might make more sense, but it's what is the job accomplishing? So it's easiest to think about in terms of like a nonprofit, like that the product there might be whatever problem they're trying to solve. In terms of software, the product is the software that you're building and the problem that solves. But it applies to everything. If you're a line cook at a restaurant, the product is the food that you're putting on the table, etc. And then finally, it's the profit. And profit isn't just money, because money in and of itself isn't meaningful, but what is meaningful is what money does allow for you to do. And so it's a lifestyle. It's the what you're able to do for your family, to be able to provide, to be able to get your kids in school and put a roof over their head, feed them, and and create a future for yourself. So those 4 areas are the 4 areas that, generally speaking, people find meaning and purpose in their life. So to talk again about these themes, those are places in your life that you can look for these themes of meaning, themes of purpose, and think, okay, here are the places where I was in this job. I really loved these different parts of it, but I didn't like these other parts of it. And you can begin to both reflectively look back and say, here are some of the things that I'm seeing, these themes that are emerging, but then also proactively look forward to say, okay, here's where I am right now. I love these, this parts of it, as well as would love to improve on these other things. So maybe I love the people that I'm working with, but not getting paid enough, and that's really bringing me down at the end of the day. So it's in those areas that meaning, that we find and experience meaning in our work. And then I just lost my train of thought. Where was I going with that?
That's totally fine. While you're thinking about that, I'll interject, give you some time to think.
Totally. Yeah.
I think these are super valuable, especially because everyone has had a job where we're like, I love the people I work with, and I can't leave this job because I love. But it's also nice because if you don't like where you are, but you don't really know why, you can kind of go through and give yourself grades on each of these.
Exactly.
And kind of be like,
exactly. Then that's exactly what the grading part. That's exactly what I wanted to say. Is like, generally when someone loves their job, they're checking a few of those boxes. Mm-hmm. Ideally, if you were to score yourself 0 to 10 on each of those, your dream job would be 10s all the way down the board, right? Yeah. But that's like, the dream job rarely exists. But you'd have some marks in each category and positive things. And so I think, just like you said, like, use that framework to think about what has worked for you in the past, and both well, and then what hasn't worked. That can be a good kind of guiding reference for you to move forward.
Definitely. Now I want to ask kind of the big question for probably a lot of our listeners, because I know personally, like, a handful of people who are in this category. What do you do when you are lost and you don't know what the next step is?
Man, first, I think it's super important just to take a deep breath and know that, like, that's a super common experience, and that you're not alone in it. I think it's really easy for us to have the mindset and to tell ourselves a story that everybody else has it figured out. Everybody else's path is so much more linear, and it's, why am I even having these struggles? But the truth is, most people go through some sort of transition like this and get stuck at some point. It's a completely normal, completely human experience. So first, I think it's super important just for you to tell yourself that it's okay. You're not alone in that, and also there's a way out, and you will find. So give yourself patience, give yourself grace. Secondly, I think, like we talked about before, and I think this is an action step. Would love to invite listeners to, is to think about how did they get into this space. And I think the main question to ask are, what are the do's and don'ts, shoulds and should nots, like the rules that have guided your decisions up until this point that have led you to a place of being stuck. So just get out a piece of paper and just brainstorm what that should be. So maybe it's like that in my life, that I should be a youth pastor, or I shouldn't be an entrepreneur. Like, that was also a thing that I had to really overcome, especially around sales and making a sale and inviting someone to purchase something, which is like the lifeblood of an entrepreneur. You've got to close a deal, otherwise you're not making any money. Yeah. but that was a big thing for me to overcome this narrative of being a sleazy salesperson. So what are the shoulds and should nots? That you shouldn't be a sleazy salesperson. All those rules, just get them all out in front of you, and just give yourself tons of permission to just put it all out there, even if you're not even sure exactly what the words would be for it. Just put it on paper. And then after you've done that, then go through in each one and then think about, where did this come from? And as much as possible, assign names to it. And so that might be the name of a person, might be the name of an institution, might be a culture or subculture that you've been in, and assign names to each one of those. And I've already talked about how that takes back some of the power from it. It helps clarify, okay, maybe I don't know where I'm going next, but at least I know what got me here. And then it gives you the ability to say, okay, this got me here. I don't want to be here anymore. Maybe I'm not going to hold that narrative so tightly. And yes, my parents or my teachers or my church or whoever it might be, maybe they had good intentions in instilling that rule in my life, but it's not serving me anymore. So I need to let it go. For me, like I already said, like that, it meant I need to figure out how to sell. I need to figure out how to make money if I'm going to be an entrepreneur. So I started pushing into that, testing that, and saying, okay, I'm going to play with this rule. What if I throw this out of my life for a little bit and see what does it look like for me to, even though it feels a little bit awkward, actually invite someone to make a purchase. So I think that's a really important and helpful exercise for beginning the process of unsticking yourself.
Excellent. I think that last bit was very crucial because kind of boiled down, it's test, try, and experiment with those rules that you've grown up. We all have these paradigms, these biases that either we've created or have been handed to us. And sometimes we do need to check and see if they're real, like if these are rules of life or if they're just things we made up to, inhibit ourselves or whatnot.
Yep.
So,
I love it.
Dan, it's been awesome having you on the show. We're coming down to the wire here. So let me ask you the last couple questions I ask all my guests. I know you started getting into it, but based on our conversation today, what 1 to 3 action items would you give to our audience to do today or this week to improve their lives?
Yep. I love it. So first, if you're feeling stuck, do that exercise that I ran through there. I think it's just super helpful. Secondly, I think that just around the idea of understanding who you are and what you want to do, I think it's just self-reflection is a really important part of this process. And so understanding, coming to understand more of your narrative, more of your story. And I think that's best done through writing. And so another really great exercise that you could do is just spend a few minutes thinking about like what are some of the biggest moments in your life, and you could just use that super generally. But maybe if you need a little more direction, like really positive experience, really negative experiences, or some combination of both, and just write that story down. Write it out in narrative format. If you've never done that, it's really helpful, really powerful to write, because you're going back into it's in those stories that we form. We're humans are like narrative making machine, meaning making machines. So everything that happens to us, we're assigning meaning to it, and out of that meaning comes our sense of identity. Like humans, like if you try to find what is identity inside of a person, it's a story. And so by going back to those moments, you're playing with what is the meaning of those moments, and how does that affect then down the line how I think about myself and who I am in the world, both for good and for ill. So if you haven't done like that kind of narrative work in your life, really want to challenge you, like write down some of the big moments. And I know that people, even if I talk about like some of the most painful moments of your life, immediately people have things that jump in their mind, events that happened to them, things that were said to them, all kinds of things. Write those down, spend time with them. If they're super, super traumatic, you might want to think about working with a professional around them. But even outside of those, capital T trauma, the smaller traumas, the smaller painful moments, it's super, super important for you to spend some time with those and write those out, spend some time with them. It's hard work. It's not fun work, but it's good work. And again, it comes down to getting back power over who you are and how you think about yourself. And then I think the final one, I've already kind of just mentioned in passing, is just write your goals every day. I'm a firm believer in goals and in using goals to move you forward. It's how everyone, I think how the people who are doing really hard things, you don't do hard things without a reason behind them. And your goals are your reason. You're not writing them down to beat yourself up about them if you're, whether or not you're on track to get them, but it's the direction that you're heading in. And to have a direction, even if you don't meet those goals, you're going to get further by pursuing them than by not having any goals at all. And so those are the three things that I would offer to listeners.
Excellent. I will put those up in the show notes so listeners, you can find those there. But Dan, how can our audience reach out to you, support you, see what you're up to, and so forth?
I love it. Yeah, I have the Meaning Movement podcast. I have a podcast of wherever you're listening to this podcast. You can hop over and check me out there. I mostly interview people just around their career narrative, journeys, how they've made decisions about what to do and why they do it, all those kinds of things. I also have a free mini course called 5 Clues to Your Calling that you can get at thecallingcourse.com. So if you want, if you're thinking about words like calling and things like what to do with your life, this is just a helpful kind of short and sweet, very, very actionable and digestible format. Just five emails over 5 days that kind of help you think through some of these ideas. So just go to thecallingcourse.com and you can get that little mini course.
Excellent. Let me write that down so I can get it exactly as it needs to be in the show notes. But Dan, I've appreciated you being on the show. It's been fun. I actually had more questions that we didn't even get to, but that's, I guess, how it goes. But thank you so much for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun. Keep it up. I really love what you're doing. I'll be listening along because I think this is a really, really important conversation that I need more of in my life. So thank you so much for making this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you guys for listening to this episode. I really appreciate it. Thanks for hanging with us, listening to these podcast episodes, coming back week after week, and subscribing. Thank you for doing that as well. I really appreciate it. And one thing I got to say, don't just put this podcast down, Put it down and then go do something. That's what I want you to do. I want you to do something because of what you've heard today. So go take action and actually have a better life. Now, if you want to support the podcast, there are a couple things you can do. As always, you can subscribe. We have episodes on Mondays and Thursdays. Thursdays is a little bit different, where instead of listening to a guest, you're going to hear me and co-host Ty Crockett put ourselves to the test by doing hard things. If you want to know what that's like, come listen to the episodes. Next thing you can do is share the show with someone you know. Share it with someone who is maybe having a hard time in their job or whatnot, and share the show with them so that way they can find hope and find meaning and have a better life. Now, if you are looking for a community that you can fit in with and maybe get some support from and that they can push you to do hard things, well, we have exactly that. We have The Forge. Now, some of you might be thinking The Forge is the name of the Thursday show. Well, you're right, but it's also the name of a free community we created to help you find support, find a push, I guess, to do hard things, but community that supports you and helps you do these hard things. But also in this community, you'll get a couple things. First of all, by signing up for it, it's free, by the way, you get access to live streamed episodes when they are recorded, as well as you'll get access to a weekly challenge that's exclusive to The Forge. Last, you'll get discounts on merchandise. Great things, right? All great things. So if you want to sign up for The Forge, go to theforge.mn.co, sign up for free today. Now, of course, in all this, you want to give back to the world. You want to do good things. What could be better than rescuing children? Now, you might not be able to go out there and physically rescue children yourself, but you can support organizations that do. I want to invite you to help us raise $1,000 in our campaign for Operation Underground Railroad. They're a nonprofit organization. They go undercover to rescue kids from sex trafficking, and they do a lot of good. So if you want to help us raise money for them, go to gofundme.com/overcoming-average, donate some money today. Again, thanks so much, guys, for listening to these shows. Thank you for supporting us, and just enjoying what we're doing here. The more you enjoy it, the more we can give you better and better content. And that's what we want. We want better and better content because that's going to lead to better results in your life. So all you got to do now is go out and do some hard things because you will overcome average.